Hey, and welcome back. Today we're going to do social authentication in Laravel, and I'm going to challenge myself to do this in under 10 minutes. So let's open up our clock and set a timer and start. So we all remember those days when we used to have to use a mixture of JavaScript and sessions and juggle pop-up windows to do login with Facebook or Google. Laravel Socialite has us covered. So let's get started. We're going to say root middleware, and we only want guests to be able to authenticate. Quite logical, right? So we are going to group this, add an a static callback, and get started. So we want to prefix this with auth as auth and group again. Static callback again, and then we're going to do another prefix for GitHub as GitHub, and there we go. So all of our guest roots are going to be within here, so anything to do with authentication will be within this group. Then we want OAuth, GitHub, and the reason we've prefixed and grouped these is because we might want to extend later on to add additional OAuth providers. So when it comes to GitHub, what we need to do is we need to add a GET request, which will be a redirect. We're just going to name this redirect for now. And we're also going to want another GET request, which is that callback. And we're going to name this callback as well. So we've got redirect and callback for GitHub. So we can come over to our controllers, and we're going to create a new directory. We're going to call this web/auth/GitHub. In here, we're going to create two invocable controllers. One will be our redirect controller, and the other one is going to be our callback controller. Both of these will be invocable, so we're just going to add a quick dummy method for the invoke and make sure that we pull that Laravel request in as well. So now I can copy this, and we're going to drop that onto the redirect, because that's where we're going to start. This will return a redirect response. And typically, you would use Socialite and a driver like GitHub to redirect. And, there's nothing wrong with doing it this way. Personally, I don't like to use facades for long-term things. I know exactly what I need to do here, so I don't need the facade to create the Socialite Manager for me when I can do it myself. So in our constructor, we're going to say private read-only Socialite Manager as a manager. We'll make that a read-only class, and instead of doing it this way, we're going to say, let's return this manager driver GitHub. Let's add a named parameter so it looks a little bit neater. We can remove that, and we're just going to quickly make sure that we Laravel Pint and make sure it's a bit of clean code that I would be happy to use. Now, in enums, I've actually got an identity provider, which allows me to switch between GitHub and email. So what I can do down here instead is say, actually, I want to use this provider that I've already created called GitHub. I'm just going to pass that value through. Now, this will redirect me to GitHub. And it allows my users to either be, okay, I want to log in with email, and they're using the same enum as an identifier, so I can understand who logs in with what quicker. So we know that this will redirect us. But then we need our callback, right? What happens when GitHub sends us a request back? Well, again, we're going to want that Socialite Manager. So we can make that a read-only controller as well, because we don't need to modify that request in any way. And typically what we'd usually do at this stage is say, okay, so I'm going to quickly dump using the driver for GitHub, and I want to get the user out of it. This will give me that user. I know that. So in theory, I can just grab this and I can say, okay, so create a user variable and assign it to that. Then I'm going to do something. But again, there might be other places I want to do some form of user creation or anything like that using Socialite. So I'd like to make a service class for this. So I'm going to say services, and I'm going to create a new GitHub service. This GitHub service is going to have a constructor which will accept a private read-only database manager as database. We know we're going to want to write to the database at some point. And what we're going to want to do is public function update or create user. This should return a user model, which could be a model because we're going to be using the query builder. So at this stage, we can say we want to return this database user transaction. If anything goes wrong, just roll back, and I don't want to worry about it. We'll figure that part out, right? Then we're going to attempt it twice, just in case there's a slight blip, maybe a table lock or anything could happen. And then that callback. We want to have a callback which returns a user. And we want our user to create a query and do an update or create for the information that we're getting. So Socialite will pass us through a user, which is typically with GitHub's Laravel Socialite 2. I like to pull this one in as an OAuth user, but also it could be the Socialite user contract, which is here. And I pull this one in as a Socialite user. So now that we're up to speed there, we can start to add our attributes and our values. Now, the attributes that are shared is going to be the provider itself. So we can say user provider in GitHub. Now, the provider ID is going to be user get ID. We want to make sure that if you log in with GitHub using ID 123, you don't get a new record created for you. The email can change, but the source of truth in this case is that provider's identifier along with the provider itself. So then we want our values. So we're going to have our name, and we can say user get name. We want a handle, which will be the user get nickname. We'll want their email, which will be user get email. Then we also want to get their avatar. So we can say user get avatar. Now, if I quickly open my create users table, you'll see that I've made a few modifications, such as name, handle, email, provider, avatar, provider ID, and I've made sure that it's unique at the database level. So at this point, this is either a user or a model. That should keep that quiet. So that could potentially throw an exception, but I like to bubble up my exceptions anyway. Let's see how we're doing for time. I've got a minute left. Not bad going. So our callback controller, what it needs to have access to that GitHub service, and we can just call this GitHub. But we also want to make sure that we've got access to auth as well. So we can just pull in that auth manager, and we're good to go. So instead of doing it like this, what I'm going to say is the user I want is this GitHub update or create based on this Socialite user. Once I've got it, I want to say this auth login using ID. The ID is that user's ID that I just created. And then I want to return a new redirect response the URL of which is root home. And I can add my type hint back as a redirect response. Where are we? And it looks like we've just run out of time just as I finished. So there we go. 10 minutes, social login. How would you change it? Let me know in the comments how you might do things slightly differently and how I might be able to improve my approach. For now, I'm going to go enjoy my coffee. Have a good day. See you later.